Hi, welcome to the first video tutorial in the free motion quilt along. Today I'm going to be demonstrating how I do what I call echo shells. You can see I've done a little bit of the design already here. This is a really great design when you're starting out free motion quilting. I think this is about the first design I tried after I'd done stippling for a while. The beauty of it is that you can echo as many times as you want and end up wherever you want on the quilt, so that you can end up filling the space without backing yourself into a corner too much. So to get started, I just do a single loop and then echo that and keep echoing it until I get to the spot on the quilt that I want to be quilting. So I'm going to do another one so that I'm back over near the other parts that I've already quilted. Simply do another kind of loopy shape and keep working my way out, echoing that same loop. Now I want to end up back over here, so I am going to do another fourth one. The other thing with this design is you don't have to start with that curved shape in the middle. You could use a leaf shape, a paisley shape, any kind of starting shape you can think of, really. As long as you echo that same shape, it'll work. So I've kind of got myself into a little corner here, so I'm just going to echo up the side of that a little ways and then start another loop. So that one kind of looks like it's sitting in behind some of the others that I've got there. Just stop and smooth out that top part of the quilt there. Now I'm doing these quite big because which makes it quite a fast way to fill the space on the quilt. But it is harder to keep those larger curves smooth. So if you're starting out as a beginner free motion quilter, it's probably easier to do kind of a smaller shape to begin with. It's a lot easier to keep smaller shapes smooth. When I get to the edges of this green area, I tend to just do a little bit of a straight line along the seam line. The other nice thing about this design is, depending on how consistent you make the spacing between your echoes, I tend to keep mine fairly regular, but you can make your first one quite close to the first loop and then work the next one out a little bit further, which gives it another different texture. I think one really important thing to keep in mind is that free motion quilting is pretty much like handwriting. How you quilt is going to be probably completely different to what other people will quilt. And you can see I'm starting to have some upside down ones on this side, which is something that I like to do. You certainly don't have to do that. And I'm not too phased about having some of these weird shapes in between, because overall it still looks like a pretty good design, I think. So as you can see, some of the time I'm echoing it 4 times, other times I'm just echoing it once or twice, depending on where I want to end up in my quilting space. And I do tend to use my seam lines to travel stitch if I'm getting myself stuck into a corner. Just rearranging my quilt here a little bit so that I can flatten it out. One of the really good things about having ditch quilted this is that I've got pretty much no pins in this area, so I'm not having to stop and start and remove pins as I'm quilting. Now I'd like to end up back over here so I can fill this little space, so I'm just going to do a 4th one. Can be a really good idea to practice these sort of things with pen and paper before you start quilting with your machine. Just to get a sense of how you're going to end up filling the space. So I do travel stitch quite a lot just to bring myself back out to a starting point to start another one of the curved shapes. And that's something you get better with practice. The more you practice, the better you are at actually following your quilting lines that are already there. I think the other nice thing with this design is you don't need to be really perfectionist about it. However it comes out ends up looking pretty good. Normally when I quilt, I would have my hands a bit closer to my foot and needle. I'm just trying to keep my hands out of the way while I'm actually videoing this so that I'm not covering up the video with my hands. Another thing I should point out is I've started on the central coloured stripe on this quilt and started fairly close to the middle, so most of the quilt's rolled up within the throat space of my machine. But because it's not a gigantic quilt, it's actually quite easy to deal with that amount of quilt that's rolled up in there. And then as I work further towards that rolled side, I just unroll it a tiny bit as I'm going. When I quilt, I tend to have both my hands fairly flat on the quilt rather than having one bunched up underneath, but that's just personal preference. I think it's worth playing with different ways of holding the quilt and seeing what works best for you. So now I'm actually holding with my right hand that rolled part of the quilt, trying to keep it fairly taut as I'm going. Now you've noticed I've got a little gap that I've left there. I'll probably just leave that. I don't think I'd go back in and try to fill that in with any quilting. Because once it's washed and it's all crinkled up, it's not going to be a major issue. I probably should have thought about it and actually done another reco. So with this little space, I will echo back around so that I can feel that little area. Just using that seam as much as possible. And then just choosing one of those shapes to echo out just to reach that seam line. As you can see, I'm not too fussy about getting over onto the coral section. So there you have it. I'll just continue quilting the rest of that stripe in the same sort of way. If you have any questions, please feel free to just send me an email or leave a comment here and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks for watching.